Hello, I'm Tony Mangino from TC2, and this is Staying Connected, where we talk about what really matters to enterprise buyers navigating today's technology and sourcing decisions. Today, we're talking about a situation that many enterprise teams face but rarely want to admit they're in. That's a major supplier relationship that is no longer working the way it should. Now, joining me today to discuss what to do when there's a breakdown in the supplier relationship is my colleague, Ben Fox. Ben is our managing director here at TC2.
Hello, Tony. Yes, interesting topic we have today.
So, Ben, maybe service quality is deteriorating. Maybe the promised original objectives and outcomes are not being delivered. Maybe costs keep climbing without a corresponding improvement in value. Perhaps the supplier keeps pointing to standard terms, policies, or timelines while the business keeps absorbing the operational pain. When that happens, enterprise leaders usually arrive at the same question. Do we repair the relationship? Do we reset the deal or start planning the exit?
Yes, that's right. And that question comes up more often than people realize, I think, especially in large managed services and outsourcing relationships, and generally those infrastructure environments where the supplier is deeply embedded. And they're not usually small contract issues. They're situations where you've got commercial friction, performance issues, support gaps, governance failures, and all of these things start reinforcing each other. So that just makes the relationship harder to manage. Every single quarter, it gets worse. The issues aren't being resolved. And, I think the customer can begin to feel like their options are disappearing.
That's why this matters so much. Once a relationship starts to break down, it's very easy for the organization to react emotionally. If people are frustrated, business stakeholders want answers immediately. Procurement always wants leverage with these suppliers, and IT invariably wants more stability. Leadership wants the pain to stop, but the right answer usually is not emotional escalation, it's disciplined diagnosis.
Definitely. Yes, I agree. For enterprise IT organizations, a failing supplier relationship, it really does matter. And if the customer does nothing, then their costs can increase, kind of workarounds that are put in place become permanent, and just generally the value of that supplier relationship starts to erode. But it's also true that if the customer kind of overreacts without a clear fact base, then that can create even more disruption without improving anything.
That's especially true when the supplier is responsible for a critical service tower or there might be years left on the deal. A lot of organizations assume they only have two choices. First, live with the problem and hope it improves, or launch a major dispute that turns into open warfare. In practice, there is usually a middle path, but it does require structure.
Yes, exactly. It's definitely a middle path. It's all about the customer finding a way to get back control. And that means understanding what is actually broken, what the root causes are, the history of how the parties arrived at their current problems, kind of what is provable, what the contract allows, where the leverage points are, and actually what the desired end state should be. And without that discipline, I think the customer really risks negotiating sort of merely based on their frustration with no thoughtful or actionable strategy.
Ben, let's start with the first step. When an enterprise believes a supplier relationship is off track, where should the work begin?
So you need to begin by separating symptoms from facts. Most troubled supplier relationships, the complaints are real, but they're very scattered. There are some issues that kind of live in tickets and reside in service reports. Some come up in invoices or come up in change orders. Some are buried in contract amendments. They're buried in online terms or even meeting notes. So whereas a supplier can live with frustration for a long time, it has a much harder time dismissing a disciplined record of what has failed, when it failed, and how often it failed, and what the business impact is.
Step one is not just acknowledging that the relationship is broken. It's building a fact base that the supplier and your own internal stakeholders have to take seriously.
Exactly right. Step one is building a fact base. And step two is defining the end state. A lot of customers kind of say, well, we need to fix things. We need to win this dispute. The win isn't really a plan. Do you want service improvements? Do you need some pricing relief? Do you need better transparency, stronger governance, a redesigned support model, perhaps, a cleaner transition path, or a complete exit from the contract? And if you can't answer that question clearly, then if you just any escalate, it really just creates noise.
And that's important because not every failing relationship should be handled the same way.
Exactly. Some relationships are fixable. So we've seen situations where the customer's contract offered pretty much no formal remedies. The provider still had years left on the deal, and replacing that provider immediately simply wasn't realistic. But when we worked with a customer to organize the facts and clarify the pain points and really focus on elevating the right issues to the right level of supplier leadership and pushed for targeted operational and commercial changes, then actually the relationship became workable again and many of the issues were resolved. But by the way, Tony, I think a critical part of such a fix has to include the customer themselves kind of contemplating and understanding and being open to how it can help the supplier be more successful too. Most situations where the supplier is underperforming and the relationship is in trouble, it's not simply because the supplier is choosing to underperform. More often than not, something has changed, or the original assumptions that a deal was built on were wrong, or the root cause of the poor performance is related to things that neither side even considered or even thought about when they originally struck the deal. So fixing a relationship is very rarely just about somehow forcing the supplier to perform. It almost always also includes agreeing some changes to the services or how the services are delivered or how the services are charged for.
Ben, there are also times when the repair path is just not the best option.
Yes, there are. Sometimes the arrangement just no longer fits the business. The service model perhaps is too rigid, or the economics are too unfavorable or too unaffordable. And the supplier's performance gaps perhaps are too persistent or just unfixable. And even where the penalties or constraints in the contract may be painful, but staying in the relationship could be worse still over time. That is why part of that work up front that we referred to, that should also include evaluating both the path to exit and the path to repair.
And that dual path evaluation creates leverage, even if the buyer ends up staying.
It does. That's the great thing. So when the supplier understands that their customer has pressure tested both options, both fixing the deal and exiting the deal, the discussion changes. The customer's no longer negotiating from because it's generally upset and dissatisfied. It's negotiating from a structured assessment of the commercial, operational, contractual realities. And that clarity often creates room for a better outcome.
Ben, let's make this practical. If a listener thinks their organization may be in one of these situations, what are the questions they should be asking right now?
Okay. First, what exactly is broken? And be specific. Is it performance? Is it support? Is it pricing, governance, scope control, change management, billing, or some of the above? And precision matters because vague dissatisfaction and anecdotal complaints just creates a weak negotiating posture. And second, what can you actually prove? Enterprises often know something is wrong, but proof, as we talked about, is spread across different teams and different systems. So you really do have to pull together the service history, the commercial facts, the contract terms, and the business impact. And the more disciplined the evidence, the harder it is for the suppliers to kind of hide behind ambiguity. The third is about what outcome does the business actually want? Do you want a commercial reset? Do you want operational accountability, better support leadership, a structured transition? There should be no escalation until the organization can articulate the outcome it is prepared to pursue. And sometimes that can be stepped options. If we get these outcomes, we're willing to continue. But if we don't, we are prepared to change suppliers. And then fourth is an assessment of what is your real leverage. And your leverage may come from contract rights, may come from market benchmarks, may come from executive relationships and competitive alternatives, from doing the transition planning so you know your options, or simply knowing the supplier's exposure if the issue is surfaced credibly. Even weak contracts do not eliminate leverage, but they do make preparation more important. And finally, Tony, it's about, are you fixing the immediate issue only, or are you also addressing the conditions that created it? For instance, if the supplier issues a one-time credit to cover some commercial issues, but nothing actually changes operationally or commercially or contractually, it may feel like a win, but the customer has really not solved the problem.
Those are the questions. What should customers avoid, Ben?
Definitely avoid escalating before you've organized your facts. And then avoid accepting soft promises in place of real structural changes. And finally, avoid confusing activity with progress. We see a huge amounts of these kind of situations with troubled supplier relationships where there are just endless meetings, but really zero progress. And what's normally going on there is they just lack disciplined movement towards a defined end state because they haven't done any of the things that we've been talking about today.
For sure. The big takeaway today is that when a supplier relationship starts breaking down, Customers don't need more noise, they need more structure. They need to understand what is broken, what's provable, what outcomes matter most, and what leverage can move the supplier toward a sustainable result. Sometimes the right answer is repair, sometimes it's a broader reset, and sometimes the smartest move is just to prepare for an exit. But in every case, the strongest outcomes come from moving out of reactive mode and into an evidence based, commercially disciplined plan.
That's right, Tony. Absolutely. Once the enterprise stops negotiating merely from a point of frustration and starts negotiating from facts, their options become clearer. And I think when your options become clearer, that's when you begin to gain control and begin to make some progress on solving the issues in your relationship.
Thanks, Ben, for this great discussion today. And to our listeners, if you would like to learn more about what to do when a supplier relationship breaks down, or if you'd like to discuss other technology strategy, sourcing, and cost reduction needs with Ben, me, or any of our TC2 and LB3 colleagues, please give us a call or shoot us an email. You can also stay current by subscribing to Staying Connected, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.